what are the things that you've noticed with women and the victims that you've seen in common? Because I'm trying to think through like almost characteristics of women that end up getting fooled or tricked or manipulated.
Understand that if somebody has targeted you and you don't know it, of course you wouldn't know it. What can you do? And it's going to be, do you have a ritual? Do you have a ritual way of behaving? That's something they always suggest, that you not have a ritual. In other words, every day you get up, you do this, you do that, and you get in your car, you drive to work, whatever. See if you can alternate that, or be aware. If nothing else, be aware if somebody is watching you, because they will be there. I don't think we teach that enough, to be suspicious. So those are the important kinds of things. And then if you get into a conversation with someone, what are they interested in? What are the questions they ask you? Are you answering them? Like, and young people go on social media and they answer them. They give information that they shouldn't. They even send photos. So those are the kinds of warnings that we have to tell young people about. But they say, oh, everybody's doing it. Well, everybody shouldn't be doing it. The other thing, we don't talk a lot about is boys' behavior. It is the boys generally that are going to be turning into the aggressor. And so what are we doing to deal with that?
I'm making some assumptions, so I would love for you to set me straight, but I assume that they go after people that can't fight back, somebody that doesn't necessarily have that backbone, that they're going to go after somebody that is going to trust very easily. So someone that's going to give their information online, that is going to be more open to giving that type of personal information. And then potentially you said rituals, people that do rituals. Would that mean somebody that is less, let's say, a little less observant of the outside world?
Absolutely would agree with that, but they need to change and be more aware. I think the kinds of things it's like we have to speak up. We have to assert ourselves. It's not in our nature necessarily, so we have to work at it hard, and be encouraging and supportive to women.
We've gone through the signs, we've gone over some victimology, and now I'd like to talk about kind of the interviewing process when, I want my audience, use this for good when we're trying to figure out if someone's lying or if they're trying to manipulate us. But the interview process is fascinating to me, and I love how you break it down. And you talk about one of the very first things is building rapport with the person that you're talking to. So talk to me about building rapport. How do we do it? And then why is that so effective?
Well, going back to the reason we do it is, are they lying? If you're doing an interview and all you're getting is misinformation, what good is the interview? So you have to go for the gold, so to speak. You have to go for the real. And how do you tell that? I spend a lot of time with my students. Are they lying? Can you watch this interview and tell me, are they lying? And how do you do that? So, and there are ways that we do it, but still, you have to build rapport. Nobody's going to talk to you if they don't feel that you have some kind of that they can trust you in some way. And that's hard in these kinds of situations, because especially if you're seeing them and you're on the other side. I had one case where the young man, he was only 20 and he had killed his whole family, his mother and his brother and sister. And he would only answer in monosyllables. And even the lawyers couldn't get anything more than yes, one word answers. So it was very hard. But how do you get into someone's head before they act? And will they tell you? Well, they'll tell you if they've written it down on social media. That's some payoff. That's where we got to go next, I think.
I saw that in the docuseries on Hulu where you're with the Menendez brothers, and to wait in order. The fact that the story goes that they'd killed their parents for money, and you had said that didn't actually sit well, like that didn't feel right to you. And so you go in and it cuts to them doing these little drawings, to your point. How did you go back to the building the rapport? So when you first walk into the room, how did you build the rapport with them in order for them to get to the point where they can trust you enough to start to draw?
So you have to spend a little bit of time just, how's it going in here? I was surprised. So Eric was relieved to be in prison. He was relieved because he didn't have all the pressure. He didn't have to think, so to speak. Now, that was initially, of course, but I found that fascinating. And it makes sense. It does make sense. He was keeping that all bottled up for so many years, and then the trial, and then it comes out, and then he has to he's found guilty and all that. But anyway, what was interesting on the drawings is, don't forget, I had some, they needed on this new thing that came out from the letter that was written by his cousin. They needed a match with his handwriting. And I had that in the drawings because he had written. That was a good thing. What he had done, he would put a lot of narrative, if you will, in the drawing. And he put the little bubble, when you're thinking something and so he had done a really good job on about 14 drawings that he had done to lead up. It was just in that week. The week was so critical that they were so careful. And so, but we use drawings, don't care, with children. It was very important to use them with children too.
Yeah, I mean, seeing the drawings of the Menendez, I can't remember who had drawn the little diagram where his dad is a giant and he's this tiny little thing, and it just breaks my heart. To your point, you can just interpret it yourself. But I'm just thinking through, there's, let's say 10 agents or 10 people that walk into that room. What are the things that you did in order for them to be comfortable enough to be able to draw? Because I assume that made a difference. If anyone else had walked into a room with a different demeanor, a different attitude, a different way of thinking, they may not have been able to open up enough to get them to draw in the first place. And so how were you able to disarm them?
I think part of it is, I wouldn't necessarily say drawings. I'd say, can you sketch something? So they wouldn't, that even the words seemed to make a difference, and say, this was really to help me understand what you were going through. So you kind of appeal to the narcissism. You help me to understand better, kind of thing. And that would work. And of course, you got to remember, if I'm seeing someone on the defense, from a defense standpoint, I'm on there to some degree. I'm not going to be fighting them, kind of thing, like the prosecution. So that I'm sure has some bearing for how much they're going to tell. But if they really want to, it's up to them how much they're going to tell you. It's always come down to that. And you can only say, the more you tell me, the more I can try to help you. You can't promise, right? But you can certainly say, I can try to help.
Yeah. You also talk about the how important active listening is.
Active listening, right. That is as in opposition to passive listening. Now, passive listening is, just tell me what happened, and you just kind of sit there and let them. But active listening is where you can interrupt if you need more. I generally go over, I kind of use a technique that one of the agents used, and it's where you let them tell you first in their own words, and then go back and say, now let's go back through it. And that's where the more active comes in, where you can now say, so then what happened then? And what happened there? And so you start to really get a better, and you're actually getting more of their memory. And then even a third time. So it's almost like you have to go over it 3 times. And you say to them, I'm doing this because I need to really get the information in my own head, or, write it down or whatever, if you're not tape recording it. And you keep getting more and more information, but that happens anyway, right? If you go through, say you have a minor car accident, and you're trying to tell somebody about it, each time you tell, you remember a little bit more. And it's just memory. It's human memory. So it's the same when you're going through a crime case.
And so what about, as they're talking and let's say they derail, especially if they're a narcissist, to your point, is they're going to want to talk about themselves, maybe in a different light, maybe painting themselves in this perfect picture. And you say the importance of patience in those situations, patience and persistence. How on earth do you have the patience, Dr. Ann, when someone's trying to really play mind games with you?
Oh, well, you have to cut them off. And it can be done very nicely. It can be, okay, now you said that, I want to go back and see this, so you pull them back on track. Don't let them get off track. You really can't, because they're masters at it. And I go, your clue is they're going to blame somebody else. Something else happened. It wasn't their fault. That's mainly what they're going to do. So the minute you catch on to that is your clue, right?
Yeah. So what do you do when they're just trying to blame somebody else?
Well, you can challenge them if you feel comfortable enough. Well, she did this. If she hadn't done that, I wouldn't have done this. If she hadn't moved, she wouldn't have run into my gun or my knife or something like that. But it did. So what she did do. So what was that all about? And you have them go back, and it's not that they're not going to blame somebody. It's a natural, I think, phenomenon to want to not admit that you've done something wrong. But if you go on social media, you'll see the kinds of things that they're talking about. When they're talking about, especially the misogynists, where they're talking about women and why they're so angry at women, and they reject me and they don't understand. Look at Elliot Rogers. My golly, his social media was, why would a woman turn me down? I am so great, and I'm so this, I'm so that.
What happened in that case, if you don't mind explaining?
Well, what happens in that case? He killed his 3 roommates, and then he was angry at women, and he went to a sorority house, and he couldn't get in. The good news is he couldn't get in, but the problem is there were women on the street that he killed. So there was no stopping him. There were plenty of warning signs, though, and even his mother admits that. It's a very moving kind. We kind of use that as the basic case in these what we call incels. You're probably familiar with those. And I think there's a continuum of them, but he was absolutely, that's what he was. And I think that the one that they're looking at now with Butler, PA, the assassination attempt, they're finding out that there's no females involved, no partners. So why is this happening? It's scary. It's scary, I think, because when you move to mass shooting, all of us are targets.
In 2021, 34% of female murder victims were killed by an intimate partner, while only 6% of male victims were killed by an intimate partner. Why is it so common that ends up becoming the truth, where when you find somebody killed and you now look the first person to be their partner?
Well, they usually on a homicide, they're going to be looking for the ex-partner, right? I mean, that's what your statistic says, and that's what's true. And sometimes they can get it very wrong. It's not the ex-partner, it's somebody else. It could be, but it is, I think that these domestic violence cases are not taken as seriously. The women have got to come forward and realize how serious it is. So, and I've done a couple of cases where they almost murdered the woman. She admitted that she almost died, and then will not come to court to testify against them. So I have to go in and do what's called, this is in New York State, the unavailable witness, where I have to, luckily they have that in New York, so that you can explain why. I have to explain to the jury why she wouldn't, after being almost murdered, she would not come in and testify. But to say that this is not uncommon, that this can be common in these in these battering cases. And so the jury at least has that information of why she wouldn't come in, because you're supposed to confront your accuser, right? So in a way, that's where the states get around. It's a compounding kind of question, but we've been successful in New York. I don't know if other states haven't.
What's the reason then? What is happening where they don't want to confront or even testify against them?
Love is a very complicated emotion, right? And a lot of them will sometimes they'll say, I love him, and he said he wouldn't do it again. That's your cycle, They bring them flowers and candy, and I'll never do it again, et cetera. And the person buys it, the woman buys it. The other thing is for the children. If they have children, in this one of the cases, she just didn't want to disrupt the family relationship for whatever. And it could be for other things. It could be embarrassment, shame, a lot of different reasons. So you can't say it's just one. There's a lot of reasons. And you have to get into that if you're going to try to explain to a jury why she wouldn't want to put the person away that almost killed her.
Yeah, when you think about, to your point about the power of love,
yeah,
is crazy when you think that people will kill because of love. People will forgive someone trying to kill them because of love.
The other thing that is important, and in this case, this happened too. He would call her at out of prison. He would get around it somehow. You're not supposed to make calls or whatever. And there was a protection order. He was not to do this, so he even broke the rules in prison, in jail. It's in jail. So even and you have to bring that up. Why she would believe that he really is ever going to change? We're never going to change.
And there's actually 2 cases that I'd love to quickly talk about. So number 1 is Bill Cosby. How many people trusted him because they knew him. So the first woman that spoke out, she knew him, for 18 months before he ever tried to drug her. And then thinking about that people thought they knew him because obviously he's famous and he's, on TV all the time. And so that trust element that people gave over to him for him to be able to utterly abuse in such a horrendous way.
He was American's dad, remember? Mm-hmm. He was and very personable on screen. So that was, but that was a double life. Actually, when I was at University of Pennsylvania, one of the faculty members there had dated him in high school.
Wow.
Had gone to the prom with him. She went to an all-Catholic school. He went to an all-Catholic boys' school. And I said to her, did you notice anything? And she said, no. She said, no. And she wouldn't believe it initially. And of course, then it got overwhelming as more and more victims came forward. So he was that well loved and liked and never showed this side of him. So that behavior probably came out later, maybe after college, when he got more narcissism, if you will. And it, and interviewing Andrea Constant was very eye-opening. And she was very brave to come forward. As you can imagine, that was not an easy. But she found she was so symptomatic. She had to leave Temple. She had to come back to Canada. And what was it? And she finally had to tell her mother. And a mother who he had really made specials, that was part of his charm, was to bring the family in. So it was hard. But I think they finally got 40 or 50 women that had come forward. All very similar pattern of what he would do. He always drugged them so that they weren't aware until afterwards.
Yeah, oh my God. And then thinking through your friend who dated him when he was younger, going back to something you said earlier, is that it becomes this progression. It's like, serial killers they start with harming animals and then they start to progress from there. So thinking about someone like Bill Cosby, I assume the fame only contributed to his power and able to manipulate these women into these scenarios. So I'd also like to talk to you about Henry Wallace, who was known as the Taco Bell Strangler.
Henry was and he would be one that was very charming. Everybody liked Henry. Everybody we talked to, high school friends, he was in the military, got medals and things like that. He was a cheerleader in high school. He did very, very well, but he had a very tough upbringing. Very poor family, and no electricity, no running water, with a great-grandmother, a mother, and a sister. So all female. And so that was hard. And he did okay. He had a couple of really important childhood experiences where he witnessed a gang rape of a girl in the neighborhood. And he was more sexualized, if you will, as a young boy. He was a big child, so that older girls, I'm talking older, 9, 10 years old, when he was like 5 and 6, would sexualize him. And at first I thought he was putting us on. But when I talked to them, we got all these witnesses to come forward and they all verified everything. So he ran into trouble when his wife, he was married, and when his wife left him. And he had been in the military, and it was all downhill when he had to leave the military. He was one that I think if he had stayed in, marriage had stayed in, and he wanted a child, and she did not want to have a child. Now, I can't say that that's the reason why he did it, but there were a lot in his history of what he did that made it. But he was a classic for someone that you would like. People liked him. You would never know that he had this other side of him, and he had 11 victims. And
And he
could,
knew all 11, right?
yeah, all of them. And I had to get to know them too. And he would know even years later when we were doing some of the interviews, he knew exactly which ones he'd given by name and so forth. So they were imprinted in his mind. And I said, which one was your favorite out of all of them? And he gave one that was interesting, that it was the one that nobody knew was a victim. He had killed her, and then he had set the apartment on fire. So he had started to escalate. And so they didn't realize it was just seen as an arson, and of course she was dead, but they just thought it was from the fire.
What do you think it was that were signs that it was him? Because to your point that everyone liked him, he was very nice. He was, seemed like he was very, very competent at his job. And I believe that even when the police went to ask him questions, he was like very helpful. And so what were the signs? Like, how did you end up catching him? What were the things that led you to him?
Oh, well, what happened is he was on cocaine. He was on crack cocaine. And so he was doing one a day. The last three were like one right after another. He was totally out of control. Totally. And his girlfriend was beginning to get very suspicious. And so when they finally zeroed in on him, he knew one of the juvenile detectives, because he was a fast food manager at one of the local fast food places. So everybody knew him. And so they got him. And what this detective did is he sat him down at the table. He took out a pad of paper and a pen, and he said, let's pray. And they prayed, and he said, to help you, we want to help you. I want you to write down everyone. And he got him to confess. What was important, that confession is very powerful. He went through 1 through 11. He went through with them and just gave it. And that's all it took. Somebody that would said, you've got to stop. I think that's the other point I want to make, is they can't stop themselves. Somebody has to stop them.
If you want to know the signs that he's a psychopath, a sociopath, or worse, a serial killer, then click here right now.
Many of them are less smooth than Bundy, but they all have a way, and they all have a place where they lure victims in.